Hi, here we go. So we're going to look at a full-length gameplay on Zavod in the main battle tank. The American tank, the M1 Abrams, is the most powerful tank, and a really funny feature of it is when you go head-to-head with another tank, a Russian or Chinese tank, if you ram them front on, you will lift them up and scoop them up so their turret will point into the sky. It's a fun little inherent advantage of having the American tank, and it can help you win against other tanks head-on. If you run out of tank shells or you have less health, it's a good way to gain the advantage if you get close enough. So, similar to the last game with the AA tank, I'm going to try to maintain the information advantage here, and do that for a few reasons. One, to keep the enemies stuck behind a line just in front of objective B, and maintain the majority of flags, so C, D, E, and F, like we have now, so that we slowly drain the enemy's tickets down to 0 over the course of the game. Also, maintaining information advantage for the purpose of not having to use the APS very often, the active protection system that blocks projectiles and tank shells from hitting the tank, because I'm running the autoloader here for increased fire rate, so reloading faster with my tank shells. I'm not running reactive armor, which on Zavod, especially playing inside these objectives C and D, is very risky, because you can become immobilized if you hit in the side, which is pretty detrimental to your survival. So just gonna pick a few people off, try my best to support the infantry, harass the helicopters, just really put the pressure on. And the reason you can play more aggressively with the main battle tank, well, more aggressively than you can play in the AA tank, is because the front of the tank is essentially immune to critical hits. There is a small spot that you can be critically hit from front on, but it's exceedingly rare that people land that hit. So you can push hard into an objective or against an enemy tank front on and feel confident that you will come out on top. Like for instance, just there, you can see on the screen it says vehicle mobility kill. I actually hit that AA tank in the side, which totally immobilized it. That doesn't happen in a main battle tank. If you take a hit in the side, the worst that can happen is you become mobility hit, which is you slow down, but not completely mobility killed. So the main battle tank is a lot better at being a bit of a fighter, a bruiser, sustaining damage and continuously putting damage out in a skirmish, in a scrim, which is really useful on Zavod, especially for what I'm trying to do. Hold C, D, E, and F. Just keep people back, and being able to take a few hits and just sit there like a sentinel. A sentinel with a giant turret is really powerful for supporting infantry. So right now, if you look at the map, there's infantry coming in slowly from the woods on the left. There's an LAV on my right, the friendly infantry. So I'm feeling pretty confident to help out with this contested flag and be as far up as I am. I know there's no one behind me, so I'm not worried about taking a critical hit from the rear. And with my positioning right now, I'm just sitting behind the corner of that building. So the only angles I really have to watch out for are directly in front and diagonally to the left, which is very easy to monitor. A situation you don't want to find yourself in is one where you've perhaps not realized that you're not surrounded by teammates anymore, and you become surrounded on 3 or more angles at a time. So front, left, right, and sometimes rear as well. That's really serious and very difficult to survive. That's where using the APS sparingly and at the right time is really beneficial. So you might see a rocket coming towards you from the front. That's okay to take that hit. You know, it'll do maybe 25 damage at most. Even if it's an RPG, they don't really hit that hard from the front. So there's not really any reason to APS that if you're worried about taking hits from the side and the rear. Something interesting about the MBT law, the rocket that was just shot at the tank, is if you pop your APS a little bit too late, it will get through the APS, essentially. So basically the instant you hear the rapid beeps, you should pop your APS. So that's really a test of your reaction skills at that point. Sometimes I'll be very diligent about that and pop APS immediately. Other times I'll be a little bit blasé, a little bit slow about it. Because for instance right now, I'm not terribly worried. I've got plenty of health, and it's not like I'm taking multiple hits, so I will try to block them, but I won't be so paranoid about it while I'm on full health to try and block them. So for instance, if I had 30 health left because I'd taken a few hits, I'd have my finger over the countermeasure ready to go. So right now I've taken 2 hits, we're starting to lose the grip on the C and D flag, so I'm pulling back a bit, tucking my tail into a more protected area, getting some distance from that LAV. So I'm just going to repair the tank here, and something else about maintaining an information advantage of, you know, tracking the map and tracking where your friendlies are and where the enemies are, is you don't have to take as many hits. You can position yourself a lot more intelligently so that you're not taking hits all the time, having to get out and repair. You can play really aggressive in the main battle tank, really aggressive, and push way up into enemy lines, get surrounded by enemies, and if you have a good gunner, you can both jump out, repair, and essentially survive something that no other vehicle can survive, except maybe an LAV if you have enough people. But what I'm trying to do here, I'm not on communications with my gunner, but we're pretty much on the same wavelength. So what I prefer to do is avoid taking the hits, just keep my distance, take some pot shots, that kind of thing. So play a little more intelligently, don't be too macho, trying to charge in all the time. So you might have noticed I'm running the canister shell and not the HMG or the LMG machine guns, and the reason for that is with the autoloader, the timing on the reload is much shorter. So if you shoot correctly, so if you line up the little dot in the middle of the crosshair for the canister shell interface, you typically will be able to kill people in one hit from quite far. If you can see at least their abdomen and their head, and you line up the dot at center mass, you typically will get all those little tungsten pellets to land enough hits to take them out. So that's really good for KPM, it's really good for being effective on the battlefield, because the thing about the HMG and the LMG, or the HMG first, it's powerful, it hits hard. If you headshot, it's, you know, really effective, but you have to manually reset your spray, essentially. Like, you have to shoot one bullet at a time if you want to maintain that first shot accuracy. If you hold down the trigger, you get a tiny bit of aim cone, or a little bit of deviation in the aim from where you're actually aiming, which is a bit annoying, because sometimes if you're trying to kill someone at range, you want to just shoot once and be done with it and not have to sit there and keep on pot-shotting away at them, hope that you hit them. And similarly with the LMG, it has a little bit of aim cone, albeit less, or arguably less. If you spray continuously, it will aim cone a fair bit, but it's the damage per shot is much lower, so you do have to be accurate and patient. So with the canister shell, I prefer it because it's just, you shoot once, if you don't kill them, you hurt them a lot, and they're probably going to get their head down anyway, so it's a lot less time wasting in the tank. That being said though, if you want to play hyper aggressively, it's probably better to take the LMG for those close quarter battles where you become surrounded by infantry, just because trying to successfully hit people that are less than 5 meters away from you with the canister shell while you're surrounded, first of all, it's reasonably hard to do, and second of all, you have to wait a while before you can shoot again, before you can shoot your main shell or another canister shell, even with the autoloader. So it wouldn't be ideal in that scenario. And speaking of the main shell, I'm running the Sabo shell, and that's mainly because on bigger maps, you know, I'm always a fan of being able to take shots at jets and, you know, not having to calculate too much to lead the target. But particularly here on Zavod, where the helicopters like to sneak around the back of the map, the Sabo shell I find is very reliable, very easy to use to hit helicopters at decent ranges, to slow them down or you know, stop them completely from backcapping and sneaking around and taking over the game. So right now we're losing Foxtrot, which I'll go back to and defend later. But you don't want to see helicopters sneaking around, getting behind them. Something else interesting about the shooting the helicopters is the Sabo and AP shells both deal the same amount of damage. So there's not really any need to take an AP shell over a Sabo shell if you're predominantly hitting air targets, which I actually don't fight too many tanks, interestingly, on this map. I'm actually fighting more helicopters than tanks. So that's where it can be prudent to take the fast, reliable Sabo shell as opposed to the slower AP shell, because there is no advantage to taking the AP shell. It just is harder to use when you're targeting air vehicles. That being said, though, targeting ground vehicles like tanks, especially ones with reactive armor, the AP shell really can make the difference in fights like that. But that's where, again, similar to timing your APS and so on, maintaining an information advantage, knowing where enemy tanks are and positioning yourself away from them in such a way that you can whittle them down or lead them into a trap or whatever. That's a good way to even the score in the capability of a 1v1. So going up against a tank with AP shells and you know, reactive armor, you'll probably lose directly if you just have a Sabo shell and autoloader. But yeah, being able to predict where they're going to be, position yourself accordingly, that's a lot more valuable than having just sheer power. So you can see every time I hit the helicopter, it only does about 60 damage, but it also mobility kills it. So a lot of pilots, typically when they take the hit, they get scared and they try and throttle up or pitch up or anything, and they can't, because you can't really, you can't increase the throttle at all when you become mobility killed in the transport heli. And typically, if you try to pitch up, you'll slow down, which makes you easier to hit. So if you want to survive a hit as a transport helicopter pilot, is accept the fact that you're going to be moving slowly towards the ground and pitch forward a little bit instead of, or pitch down instead of pitching up, to maintain airspeed and maneuverability and get closer to the ground to avoid taking another hit from a tank. Because once you get hit once, it's a lot easier to hit you the second time. So again, coming back and really making sure we keep control of these flags. These types of scenarios are where you really need to rely on your infantry to help. You can see here that example, or an example of what I was talking about earlier. Relying on the canister shell at really close range isn't ideal. So you really want to lean into the infantry, really just make them feel confident enough that they can swarm the area and take out all the grubs that are hiding in hard to deal with positions that a tank can't reach, like for instance in the train cars. Right there, I could have used the canister shell and gone one by one killing those two guys, but I actually tried to kill them with the shrapnel mechanic in this game, or the I guess debris mechanic, flak mechanic. Even with a Sabo shell, if you hit a wall, essentially debris like bricks and mortar come flying out the back of that wall and kill people, which is a good way if you want to take out two people at once or more. That's probably the way to do it instead of trying to hit the ground, because with the Sabo shell there isn't much splash damage. It just sort of hits hard on the ground and does a little bit of tiny bit of area of effect damage if it's really close to the target. But to give you an idea, if you shoot someone directly at their feet with a Sabo shell, they typically won't die from it. Whereas the AP shell and the HE shell absolutely will take them out. So trying to go for environmental damage on players is it's useful for taking them out when you're too close to reliably use your canister shell. Because even small little movements are enough to make you miss, and then you have to wait about just over 2 seconds to reload your next shell. which is a long time when you're surrounded and trying to fight your way out of a situation. That's something else I mentioned last game briefly, is when you're fighting on bad terms, do everything to maintain an advantage. So just there in the tank, I was pretty confident we could take out those two guys down the hill, so I drove down rough terrain. But that really, you know, that rocks the tank around. It makes it hard to aim. It's, you know, you slide a little bit. Everything is, it's not ideal. So if you need to take a big fight against a lot of infantry or another tank, sometimes it is better just to stay still, even if it means you'll take more hits. Obviously, play that by ear, but staying still before you shoot is really critical in the tank, especially if you're relying on the canister shell, because there's no follow-up. If you shoot and you miss, that's it. You have to wait for the next shell, and that can cause you to lose fights and, you know, have your tank blow up sometimes, which is why the information advantage strategy positioning is a lot more, or strategic positioning is a lot more important. So rely on, if I had to sum it up, I'd say rely on strategy, not skill. Because there are times where it doesn't matter how accurate you are and skillful you are, it's just not strategically possible to take out as many people at a time as you need to, with this loadout in particular. But even with HE shell and LMG, you still will find times where you can't win. You become overwhelmed. So yeah, really positioning is a big one. So we're still doing well holding the map, really draining those enemy tickets hard. They've tried a few times to backcap, but particularly with the main battle tank, it's a really good versatile vehicle to take back to those flags and recap those flags, because it is remarkably quick. I believe, I'm not totally sure, I believe the M1 Abrams is the quickest tank by a small margin. So you can get back to the flags quickly. And like I was saying before, even terrain is where you want to be. So you'll rarely see me on the train tracks or driving through craters or on hills, because it's so much easier to fight when your tank isn't sliding and you're on flat terrain. There are tracks of the map that are indestructible, so portions of the ground that can't be damaged, which is really valuable to learn those for each map. Like on Dawnbreaker, for instance, the roads, you can't really make a crater in the roads, so it's very stable to drive over in the tank, which makes it very easy to shoot. But yeah, really just staying on even terrain and stopping before you shoot, probably the most critical ways to be accurate and effective in the main battle tank. So here you'll see this is exactly the type of scenario I was looking to generate, is this situation where the enemies are all stuck on this hill and it's basically just a game of whack-a-mole, shooting canister shell after canister shell at dudes as they pop their head up. And like right there, you saw the headshot bonus and that guy dropped in one hit. He gets almost no warning that the canister shell's on the way, so with an HMG or LMG, they typically get hit once and get a tiny bit of warning, time to react. Canister shell, it's a one-frame death. There's no warning. Unless you're expecting it, you know, you just get wiped out, which is very good for taking out infantry. Some people will run the HE shell, the high explosive tank shell, to manage the infantry on this map. You absolutely can do that, but that sort of encourages more hyper-aggressive brawler gameplay, as opposed to this more passive sniper type of gameplay that I'm utilizing here. So I'm typically staying back, you know, reasonably well protected by cover, friendly infantry surrounding me, just taking pot shots basically. But you know, if I had the HE shell on the LMG right now, I'd probably be charging up to that hill and just getting amongst it with those infantry, because the HE shell really puts the damage on. You don't even have to hit them, you don't even have to be anywhere near them, and you'll drop infantry with the splash damage. It's really powerful. But that being said, it only does 75 damage to scout helicopters and considerably less damage to transport helicopters. So, you know, and it's slower, even slower than the AP shell. So it takes more skill to use to hit air targets, and you're not even rewarded for it with the damage that you do to them. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to just fight the infantry and really rack up the kills, then take the HE shell and the LMG, get amongst it, probably take reactive armor as well, and just get in there, just mosh with the infantry and kill them all. If you want to, you know, help the team more, be more of a utility by taking out vehicles and helicopters and so on, the canister shell and the Sabo is probably the way to go. And that's another point where the canister shell really shines. Even at range, if you land enough of the pellets from the canister shell on a helicopter, it does a huge amount of damage. Huge amount. And it can cause mobility kills, mobility hits, which makes it harder for the pilot to recover. It makes them slow and steady, so they're easy to predict and track and shoot again. Yeah, it's a really powerful secondary weapon. And, you know, there are other secondary weapons you could use, the staff shell, the guided shell. That's really depending on what you want to do. On a map like this, I wouldn't recommend the staff shell. That's really good for anti-vehicle. But it's basically, you've denied yourself infantry fighting capability by taking it. And same thing with the guided shell. Unless you're using a strategy where your gunner uses the laser designator, the soft lam. Yeah, it's, even on Zavod, it's just not worth doing because there's way more infantry than vehicles to fight. But yeah, I hope that was helpful for anyone learning tanks now before the new Battlefield game, or, you know, anyone looking to figure out new tactics and tricks. But yeah, that helps. Thanks for watching.